Braves and baseball fans, it's time to take a trip from coast to coast across Major League Baseball.
There it goes, a long drive. If it stays fair, home run.
One strike away. Sandy into his windup. Here's the pitch. Swung on and missed a perfect game.
Fly ball deep left center. Grissom on the run. Yes! Yes! The Atlanta Braves have given you a championship. Listen to this crowd.
Left side, Swanson to first. Braves are world champions.
Braves and baseball talk, straight from the diamond.
Brought to you by Mark Spain Real Estate. Get a guaranteed offer on your home today. And Window Nation. Call the pros at Window Nation at 866-90Nation.
Here's Grant McAuley.
Hello and welcome to From the Diamond. I am Grant McAuley. These are the Kia Studios. It's Sports Radio 92.9 The Game, and it is time to close out the weekend. And for the Braves, looking to close out a series sweep up in Philadelphia. What a start to the season it has been for them. Some Sunday Night Baseball will be coming your way. We'll get you tuned up and ready for that as the Braves and Phillies will wrap up their three-game set. Atlanta will stay on the road, though, to continue another road trip that, as we've looked at the results of the series that the Braves have played thus far, you have to be feeling, I think, pretty good about where this team is, and then you can kind of take an inventory of maybe some things that haven't quite clicked yet for them that could start clicking that might even make this team a little bit better than the version that we've already seen here in the early going. But as far as the things are going for the Braves overall, I would say you've got to enjoy this first 3 weeks or so. We're going to dig into some of the stats, some of the trends, and some of the top performers that have contributed to this great start for Atlanta in the standings in the National League East. And really, if you want to look at it big picture, 30,000 foot view, as I like to say, pretty good in all of Major League Baseball for the Braves. So we do have a lot to get into on this edition of the show. I want to remind you, as always, to subscribe to From the Diamond wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find it on the Odyssey app, and you can also follow me on social media at Grant McAuley on most platforms. You can find at FromTheDiamond.com a nice little top navigational bar that's got links to just about any and everything that I've got going on, including all the fun baseball card stuff that I'm doing. So be sure to check that out as well. I'm on TikTok, which I guess I've been on TikTok for a while, but I don't think it's necessarily ever been at the top of my list of the top social media platforms for me. I guess for me it is X, formerly known as Twitter, though everybody still calls it Twitter, so heck of a job on the rebrand there, if everybody still calls your thing the old thing. Be that as it may, that's where most of my baseball musings can be found. But as far as the baseball cards were concerned, I'm trying to do the short-form content, opening some packs up, and I'm going to be ripping some boxes as well, vintage cards. I'm not doing the new stuff. I know it's popular, and also I feel like a bit of a money trap that I'm going to try to stay out of. But for the nostalgia that I can get for going back to the 80s and 90s when I really got into collecting and fell in love with the game of baseball, and baseball cards were a big part of that, that's what I'm aiming to do. So there's a little inside baseball on what I've got coming up there. I'll probably be doing those rips on YouTube. I do them live, so we'll do a little Q&A, some of that other good stuff. But for the most part, I know you're tuned in, not to hear about baseball cards, but to hear about the Atlanta Braves. And we've got a lot of good stuff to talk about, because the Braves have been playing a really good brand of baseball. They have played 7 series thus far. The Braves have won 6 of those, and they have split the other one. So I went back and looked. I was curious because I guess I'm just a glutton for punishment, or maybe I'm just making sure that this is, in fact, a new calendar year, and it's not an extension of what we've seen in 2025. But it took the Braves a total of 14 series to win 6 of those to begin last season. So when I tell you this is a very different start to the year, you can say, well, yeah, I can read the standings. Yes. But I think in overall quality, there are a lot of different trends that have made that a reality for the Braves. The pitching has been extremely strong. And the pitching has been strong despite the fact that you're missing several key contributors. And you may not have some of them back for quite some time, but one of them is down in the minor leagues rehabbing and could be back with the club in the next couple of weeks. And that will certainly be a boost as far as your starting rotation is concerned. But not only has the rotation passed the early tests, I mean, again, we'll dig into the numbers and talk about some of the guys that have made that possible, but I think the Braves bullpen has been among the, if not the best, at least in the National League, maybe all of baseball. And I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek because if you look at staff ERA, the Braves are number 1 in all of baseball, and they're number 1 by a considerable margin. So it would stand to reason that one or both of those areas, the starting rotation and the bullpen, are going to be pretty strong, and in fact they are. Both with sub-3 ERAs. And I know that's not the only stat to hang your hat on, but it's a pretty good indicator of how many runs the other team is scoring, and it's a very good indicator this year because the Braves have become one of the better defensive teams in baseball, particularly on the infield. That's something that Atlanta really did not have in its back pocket last year when there were some struggles. And I know making all the plays obviously is a big part of that. Run prevention can help you win some baseball games. The Braves weren't great at doing that last year. They had their pitching struggles. They had their pitching injuries. They had their offensive struggle. They had their offensive injuries. A lot of things added up to a bad year a year ago. And it's starting to feel a lot more like an outlier than something that you should have been worried about as much as maybe some were about the continuation of it into 2026. But I will also say, because I think it's only fair, that if you were concerned about it, you had reason to be. Because this wasn't just 2025. I think there was a little bit of an extension of 2024 when the Braves offense wasn't quite as powerful as that record-setting year of 23. And the injuries that added up in that season, including losing Ronald Acuna Jr., there's not a bigger injury than that. But you also lost Austin Riley for significant time, and you were out there. Alex Anthopoulos was, I guess. None of us were. But Alex Anthopoulos was out there on the waiver wire, basically, trying to pick up some pieces just to formulate a lineup in 2024. So you thought in 25, I think, that, okay, well, things should be better. Guys should bounce back. Some people should be healthy, and you'll get Ronald Acuna Jr. back, and, you'll get a better version of the Braves offense. And really, in the first half, it was not. The final couple of months of last season, though, I think began a little bit of this course correction that we've seen for this club, at least offensively speaking. Pitching-wise, there were significant questions about injury because every member of the starting rotation on opening day last year was hurt for a long period of time. And some of them have still not made it back to this year to be able to affect the starting rotation in the ways that you want them to. Chief among those, two guys named Spencer. You got Spencer Strider, who's out on his rehab assignment right now. I got an update on that a little bit later on. We'll dig into when we can expect him to rejoin the Braves rotation in the near future, if all goes according to plan. And then you got Spencer Schwellenbach, who arguably, of the pitchers not named Chris Sale, might be the most valuable arm that you've got in your rotation. But you're not going to have him for what looks like at least a couple of more months before we start talking about a feasible timeline to potentially put Spencer Schwellenbach back in your rotation. And then you had two other members, in Reynaldo Lopez and Grant Holmes, that also missed a ton of time last year. Reynaldo made one start a year ago. Don't need to remind you of that. I think a lot of people, that was kind of the start of the disappointment a season ago was, okay, well, Reynaldo blew his shoulder out. And then some guy that we're not going to name because we're not going to get into it right now might have gotten himself suspended for PEDs for the first of two times. And that really punctuated a terrible start to last season. But the terrible start for this season has been happening in other places in the National League East. I bring good tidings from New York, where the Mets came into Sunday having lost 10 consecutive games. And if you like meltdowns, which I don't know, some of us, it's like watching car crashes. You just can't turn away. Well, you can watch the Mets as of right now. Could that change over the course of a long season? Yes. Is anybody down here feeling like they'd like to see it change for them? No, I don't think so. But if you do like meltdowns, Frank the Tank, our old buddy, I don't know if it's performative. If it is, it's a performance art that I'm not sure necessarily appeals to everybody, but somebody's going to need to send help for that guy because these 10 losses might do him in a lot earlier this year than some of those other Mets teams. And I know, the New York Mets have been an enigma over the years. Even when they're supposed to be good, it's just never easy. But for the Braves, you really can't throw stones from your glass house because coming into this year, you were wondering what version of this team you were going to get. And I think we started to get that answer, I guess is my point here, while also enjoying the fact that the Mets are not off to a good start. The Phillies do not look like the Phillies right now. And can that change for them? I'm more inclined to believe that, yes. Because they do have Bryce Harper, who I am not convinced is cooked. They do have Kyle Schwarber, who they spent a lot of money to keep in a Phillies uniform over the winter. They've got Trey Turner. JT Realmuto, I think you could maybe make the argument that a catcher, that mileage behind the plate is going to catch up with him. But, obviously still a pretty good player. But their core has kind of done that thing that the Phillies did in the early 2000s, which is all of a sudden they just kind of get old. Or they get old and they get hurt. And that's a rough place to be. But in any sport and in life, Father Time is undefeated. So the Phillies are kind of dealing with that right now. They're not hitting very well. They're not pitching very well if you're not named Christopher Sanchez, who is still quite a nice addition to any rotation. But they don't have Zach Wheeler. I don't think Aaron Nola has pitched particularly well for them since re-signing that huge contract, which I remember a couple of winters ago, there were some folks that were all on Alex Anthopoulos. Go out and spend that money on Aaron Nola. Now, look, I think we can make a case about a lot of different places the Braves could have spent some money, and you would have some very valid points. But I don't think anybody's going to sit over here and say, in hindsight, wish you'd signed that deal. We don't want to relitigate the first base situation, the shortstop situation, or even the starting pitcher who started the All-Star game for the American League last year at Truist Park after spending the first 8 or 9 years of his career in a Braves uniform, and that, of course, is Max Fried. These are some guys who went out and got paid in other places, but I don't know. I think you dodged a bullet by not signing Aaron Nola because it does not look like that is going to be a contract that's going to age particularly well. But that's kind of my point with the Phillies here is it doesn't look like they've aged particularly well, and some of the younger players that they expected to step up and really be a part of that whole scene there have not really been impact players whatsoever. So when you look at the National League East standings, and let's go ahead and do that, that's what all this was leading to, it's a very, very strange ride. You got the Braves at 14-7. I'm going to give you the complete list right now of teams in Major League Baseball with a better record than the Atlanta Braves, so grab a pen. The Los Angeles Dodgers, and that's the end of the list. The Braves and the Padres are 14-7. The Dodgers, 15-5, coming into action on Sunday. So a pretty darn good spot. And that's not just the National League, that's all of Major League Baseball. But looking at the National League East, the Braves have already opened up a 4.5-game lead over the Miami Marlins and the Washington Nationals, the two teams that you totally expected to be in second and third place in the National League East as the month of April winds into its latter portion. Then you got the Phillies. The Marlins and Nationals are 10-12. The Phillies 8-12. The Mets 7-15. Losers of 10 in a row. Just an extremely, extremely rough time for the New York Mets. And, you know, I'm just not going to sit here and say that you hate to see it because, in fact, you don't. But the New York Mets on Sunday lost a game to the Chicago Cubs. I believe, according to my math, that makes 11 straight losses. And then you have the losing pitcher, Craig Kimbrell, sleeper agent. That's what happened. Maybe not. But either way, the Mets are searching for a lot of answers, and they're not finding much of anything as it currently goes. But the Braves have put themselves into a very good position to start this season off with the momentum that they were searching all last year for. And if you keep winning series, you're going to be in a pretty good spot to do it. We're going to talk about how exactly the Braves have been doing all of this. We're going to talk about some of the big contributors to the rotation. And we're going to talk about some of the big contributors in the lineup and some of the good trends for some guys that you want to see some things from. I'm also going to be joined by Brandon Gaudin of Braves Vision, who's going to talk about the launch of the Braves' new television network, give us the view from the broadcast booth, and a lot of other insight on the team. You'll hear from Austin Riley. You will hear from Bryce Elder. You'll hear from Walt Weiss, as I was out at Truist Park all week as well. Lots of great stuff to get to on the show. This is From the Diamond. I'm Grant McAuley. This is Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. You can also find it on the Odyssey app.
Now, more From the Diamond with Grant McAuley.
Brought to you by Mark Spain Real Estate. Get a guaranteed offer on your home today. And Window Nation. Call the pros at Window Nation at 866-90Nation. Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Welcome back into From the Diamond with Grant McAuley, right here on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. We're live from the Kia Studios on a Sunday. Very sunny, a little bit chilly, though. Weather has not decided what exactly it wants to be just yet, but the pollen has decided that it wants to be everywhere, so I've been trying to fight off the spring allergies, which I didn't know I had, but I'm finding out things later in life that I didn't know I needed to deal with, and all of a sudden, you get a whole new list of stuff that you got to contend with, and pollen, unfortunately for me this season, has been one of those, but for the Braves, they have been contending in the right way in the National League East. We talked about that as we open up the show here. Off to a very good start. Meanwhile, some of their divisional foes and teams that were projected to be at or near the top of the division are really not that at all. The Philadelphia Phillies are one of them. Braves are wrapping up their 3-game weekend series up at Citizens Bank Park, a place that they have not swept a 3-game series since 2006. 2016. So it's been a hot minute. As far as getting back a little bit further than that, the New York Mets and their 11-game losing streak is the worst that they have had, I believe, since 2004. So every 22 years or so, you have a pretty awful losing streak, I guess. And I guess if you can put it off for 2 decades, it could be worse. It could be happening to you every year. So there is that. The Rockies, the White Sox, maybe the Pirates, Athletics, some of those other teams that have been going through the slog for a while might, be happy to put it off every 20 years. Could be one of those things. But either way, not a great brand of baseball being played up there. The Cubs finished off the 3-game sweep, and the Mets dropped their 11th consecutive game. So the Braves continue to roll in the National League, and they haven't even played here today, in National League East, I should say. But one of the big things that's working for the Braves is the fact that they have done something. They've combined a couple of things that pretty much add up to great things. If you score the most runs in Major League Baseball while allowing the fewest, I'm here to tell you, you're in a good spot. And that's where the Braves find themselves coming into Sunday's action. Runs scored. These are Major League Baseball ranks, not just the National League. 118 runs scored, most in Major League Baseball. Home runs, 28 of those, fourth in Major League Baseball. Batting .278 as a team, second best mark in Major League Baseball. On base percentage, .344, second in Major League Baseball. And slugging, .454, which is also second in Major League Baseball. So some very good things going on there. And you would think, okay, well, all right, the offense is driving this thing, and there's where the wins are coming from. Well, the pitching is also doing its part. How about the number one ERA in all of baseball at .270, nearly a third of a run lower than the second team in all of baseball. And how do they do that? Well, allowing the fewest runs certainly helps. The rotation ERA is first, 2.60, and the rotation is backed up by a great bullpen with a .285 ERA, which is second best in all of baseball. So put it together, and you find yourself with the best ERA for a pitching staff in baseball. Opponents hitting just .220 against him. And here's one thing that I noticed that the Braves are doing well this year, that outside of really one game, the only game I can think of, where they walked 8 guys, the Braves are just not issuing walks. Fewest walks in Major League Baseball has worked out pretty well. So if you don't let them hit, you don't put them on for free, it's hard to score runs, and the Braves pitching staff has been doing its part, and the offense has been doing its fair share of damage. Again, 118 runs scored. I know that there are a couple of big games this year that you can throw in there that, are fair to call the outliers. You're not going to score 17 a night. You're not going to score 11 or 13 runs a night. You're not going to score 9 runs a night. But when you do, it feels awfully good to win that way, especially when you shut out the other team, and that is what the Braves were doing to the Philadelphia Phillies to open up the weekend. You had the offense rolling, and you had the pitching doing the things that it needed to do. And the National League East, I was just looking at this, it's pretty much the exact opposite of what the National League Central is, where every team entered Sunday above 500 in the Central. And I expected that to be like one of those divisions that would be a bit of a race between at least 3 teams. But a very good start for every team in the Central. The Mets and Phillies, though, struggling, and New York now an 11-game losing streak and up to their ears in injuries on top of bad play. 11 games played for the Mets, all losses in a row. 19 total runs scored. That's a good way to lose, 11 in a row. But how exactly the Braves are putting it together, as I just mentioned, it's great hitting and great pitching, and also the great defense. As I talked about a little bit last week and here to open the show, the Braves have turned themselves into one of the better defensive teams in all of baseball in terms of outs above average and some of the more advanced metrics. But if you just watch the Braves on a nightly basis, there's just not a lot of self-inflicted wounds. So let me add that to the pile here for your pitching staff. If guys aren't getting hits, and you're not walking guys, and your defense is making all the plays, you got a very, very good run prevention formula on your hands there. Now, speaking of run prevention, Chris Sale's been pretty good at that over the course of his career, and he was in control on Saturday with 7 innings of 1-run ball against the Phillies. He struck out 7 batters. And Sale, very quickly in 5 starts, is 4-1 with a .279 ERA. And I know he had that one clunker out in Los Angeles where it just seemed like he just couldn't find it there for an inning or two. But the strikeouts, they also haven't been quite as plentiful this year just yet for Chris Sale, who's historically one of the best strikeouts per 9 in the history of Major League Baseball. But he is striking out a batter per 9 or a batter per inning. I think that does pretty well. And that also has helped him make some history this year. He's already passed Bob Feller and Warren Spahn on the all-time strikeout list. And in Saturday's game, Sale passed Tom Glavine for 29th. And I wanted to show a list of innings and strikeouts to show you exactly how special Chris Sale is. But let's look at this list real quick. Chris Sale's now 29th in Major League Baseball, 2,608 strikeouts, 1 ahead of Tom Glavine, who was 30. Next up is Chuck Finley. He's 2 strikeouts shy of Chuck Finley at 28. David Cone, 60 strikeouts ahead of Chris Sale right now. So there's 2 more spots that Chris Sale should be able to sail right past here in 2026. Then you get Frank Tanana, who's at 2773. And then 25 on the list is Cy Young, 2,803 strikeouts. Now, why am I reading all these stats off to you? Well, they're impressive, number one, but also the company. That name, Cy Young, pretty good one. If you're passing Cy Young in just about anything other than losses, I think you're doing pretty well. But that's a gentleman that obviously set a pretty high standard. He's got an award named after him. But as I was looking at this, I mean, we're talking about pitchers that have struck out between 2,600 and 2,800 batters, but how many innings did it take him to get there? For Chris Sale, 2,608 strikeouts and 2,113 innings. Let me just boil it down to tell you that that's an absolutely absurd rate. Chris Sale's been striking out batters over the course of his career at about an 11 to 12 strikeouts per 9 rate. How many innings did it take Tom Glavine to get his 2,607 strikeouts? Oh, only about 2,300 more than Chris Sale. So double the innings for Glavine, and Chris Sale just passed him in strikeouts. All of these other guys threw between 700 and 2,000 more innings in the cases of Chuck Finley, David Cohn, and Frank Tanana. But then you look at Cy Young. Cy Young, 2,800 strikeouts is impressive, but he did it in 7,356 innings. So I got curious, and this may be one of those crazy anecdotal out-of-pocket stats that means nothing to anybody but me, but since it's my show, I'm going to throw it out there anyway. If Cy Young were able to strike out batters at the same rate that Chris Sale does over the course of his career, he would have finished with 9,078 strikeouts. 9,078 strikeouts. That's only 3,300 more than Nolan Ryan, who, speaking of which, if he had the K rate of Chris Sale, he being Nolan Ryan, 6,648 strikeouts. So an extra 900 for the Ryan Express, who was awfully good at striking out batters and doesn't need my help or explanation at this point. But it just lets you know that, historically speaking, there are not many pitchers in Major League Baseball that hold a candle to what Chris Sale does from a rate standpoint. And it's just kind of wild to think, wow, if this guy threw 3,000 or 4,000 innings, and he might get to close to 3,000 innings before he hangs it up. But I think we're watching every fifth day a bona fide Hall of Famer who continues to make his case. And when you're passing names the way that Chris Sale has this year, Warren Spahn, Bob Feller, Tom Glavine, and you're closing in on Cy Young, I would say you're in a good spot to make a very, very, very good Hall of Fame case. Now, at the other end of the spectrum on the Braves rotation, and this is not a knock, by the way, Bryce Elder has been just trying to, I think, find the continuity and consistency in his game for the last couple of years. But he was a very important pitcher for the Braves last year because it felt like he was the last man standing. And he was the guy who was willing to take the ball, go out there, and try to give the Braves a quality start and give them the opportunity to win. And Bryce Elder continues to put up strong numbers. He closed out last year on a very good clip, his final 7 starts, with a sub-3 ERA last year, and 8 walks and 41 punch-outs and 44 2/3 innings in those 7 starts. So you felt like he had some momentum. But Bryce Elder's second in Major League Baseball with a 0.77 ERA and 23 1/3 innings thus far in his 4 starts this year. I think even better than you expected, obviously. There's the first big, huge, obvious statement, maybe the second. I think I've referred to the Mets as playing some bad baseball right now. That's an understatement as well. But top 3 best sliders in baseball in terms of run value, you got Chase Burns, you got Mason Miller, and you got Bryce Elder. And the difference between these 3 guys is the first 2 I mentioned throw 100 miles an hour. Bryce Elder does not throw 100 miles an hour. He does throw 3 different fastballs, though, and that has been part of his success. So let's hear a little bit from Bryce Elder, who talked about what exactly it is that has changed for him and how exactly he has evolved his approach to pitching over the course of the last year.
And I think that's something I learned last year, really kind of, I always kind of knew that, but seeing it firsthand last year, kind of when I was really struggling, is like, the good run I went on last year literally started with me saying, if I give up 5 or 6 runs, that's fine, but I'm going to progress the game. The game is going to move forward. I'm not going to get in bad counts and situations, and obviously it's still going to happen, but progressing the game forward and keeping it moving, and it's turned out that I realized that maybe my stuff is a little better than I thought it was, so kind of staying in the zone and making hitter swing.
So if you're able to set the tone, set your pace, and also get the results that you want to and execute your pitches, you kind of find the sweet spot for a guy like Bryce Elder, who can run it up there about 94, but he's not trying to necessarily just throw every pitch with maximum velocity. He's about execution. He lives in the margin somewhat, and he does try to get hitters to expand. But this is a guy that's also had success at the big leagues before. It just feels like forever ago since he was able to find that consistency. He was an all-star back in 2023, but now at 26 years old, I think Bryce Elder may feel like he's just a little bit better now as a more complete pitcher than he was even as an all-star.
I think I'm a little bit more complete. I think that year I just kind of went, however many starts it was, where I was just, really executing pitches when I needed to. And, if you get into a certain count and you make the pitch. But, I feel a little bit more complete. I feel like I, have more weapons. And So, yeah, I don't know. We'll see. We're just going to try to keep it going.
Yeah, and keep it going is what you should be doing when you're rolling along like he is. You're not looking to make a whole bunch of changes. Just get out there, get your work done, get your game planning going. But Walt Weiss has been watching this from the dugout and has obviously known Bryce Elder throughout the course of his career as well. And the Braves manager weighed in on what exactly it is that is leading to Bryce Elder's success this year.
It's all of his pitches, really. The secondary stuff is better. His slider is an underrated pitch. And if you go back to his first year when he made the All-Star team, you would see a lot of hitters swing at bounce sliders. They just didn't see his slider. And I think he's got that slider back again. He's getting a lot of swing and miss on it. He's getting some takes on it. They just don't see it very well. You know, he's got the cutter to add to the arsenal. He had it once upon a time. He brought it back, and it's a good pitch for him. It complements the changeup really well, and the changeup's gotten better. So all of his stuff has ticked up. Two-seam, the four-seam, so he's got three different fastballs, two-seam, four-seam, and the cutter. It makes it difficult on a hitter when you got three different fastballs, and the other stuff is working too. So he's throwing the ball really well.
And I think that's about as good a scouting report as you're going to find when you're throwing three different fastballs. You also are using a changeup, and you've got a good swing and miss slider. You've got the opportunity to really keep hitters off balance. You just have to be able to sequence things. You have to be able to, repeat that delivery, to tunnel those pitches. And if you do, you have a chance, even at Bryce Elder's level or ability level, if you want to call it that, where it's very different than what Chris Sale is doing, to still have success just in a totally different way. Let's hear one more from Bryce Elder, because I know there's been a lot of discussion because I've heard it. I've gotten this feedback. Why is Bryce Elder still in this rotation? How have the Braves not found somebody, to take his spot in the rotation? So he was asked the other night, I thought this was interesting, what he makes of those kind of comments and I guess maybe criticisms and how exactly he keeps things in perspective. Here's what Bryce Elder said about kind of being an overlooked and maybe underappreciated part of the Braves rotation.
That's one thing I've always, even, when I've had good runs, I think that's something that I've always understood is being healthy, you're going to get a chance. If you're good enough and healthy, you're going to get a chance. And so I try to handle my business correctly to keep me out there. And I don't know, it's a weird game. You the more time you spend out there, it's not always going to go good, but the more things you learn as long as you're paying attention. And, it's been good the past into last year and the beginning of this year, and so, but like we talked about, it's a long season. We got to keep going one start at a time.
And one start at a time is just about all you can ask of a guy to do. And Bryce Elder, I think, has benefited from that mentality right there to learn what he can from the losses and try to execute better. And he is executing at a high level right now as one of the members of arguably the best rotation in Major League Baseball. And who'd have thunk it when we were talking to spring training about all these injuries? We'll get into more of the pitching discussion. We've also got to talk about a couple of Braves hitters who are starting to turn the corner and how the offense is doing the things that it's doing thus far this year. More to get to here on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game and the Odyssey app.
Now, back to more From the Diamond.
Brought to you by Mark Spain Real Estate. Get a guaranteed offer on your home today. And Window Nation. Call the pros at Window Nation at 866-90Nation. Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Welcome back in. This is From the Diamond. I am Grant McAuley, live from the Kia Studios. It's Sunday afternoon. Braves going to wrap up their three-game set with the Philadelphia Phillies and head on over to Washington. The Nationals for 4 games. First look at the Washington club this year, and then it's the Phillies coming to Truist Park. So you will see the Phillies a half a dozen times here in April, and then I believe, if I look at the schedule right, won't see the Phillies again until September. So you'll just have to wish all the miseries on them possible as far as not winning ball games are concerned, so that when you do face them, you're not really sweating it out over those final couple of series later on in the year. But things have worked out thus far for the Braves. We've been talking about the reasons why, and pitching has been a big reason why. Chris Sale is Chris Sale. Bryce Elder, meanwhile, has kind of been a revelation in this rotation in the early going and pitching like the best version of himself. And then you've got some other pitchers in this rotation that I think have been able to quiet at least some of the doubts and some of the questions that came with them into this year. And who am I talking about there? Obviously, Reynaldo Lopez and Grant Holmes, both of whom missed significant time last year. A shoulder surgery for Reynaldo Lopez cost him all but one start last year. And then you've got Grant Holmes, who has a torn UCL. So it's the ligament that requires Tommy John surgery typically. You can rehab it. Just a lot of pitchers choose to go ahead and go under the knife and get that thing swapped out. Grant Holmes decided he wanted to go the rest and rehab route because he believed that he had been pitching with this for some time and that it wasn't necessarily, I guess, as big a problem as perhaps it is for other pitchers. So he went the rest and rehab route, And both of these guys have pitched pretty well thus far. Lopez, a 2.18 ERA through 4 games started. I would not say that he has really looked, dominant or overpowering, if you will, from a strikeout perspective, but he has been able to kind of limit the damage when he's got in trouble and then come back out and settle things down and give the Braves the innings that they need to not leave the bullpen in the lurch and having to cover a whole bunch of innings in the meantime. And then you got Grant Holmes, who will head into Sunday Night Baseball against the Philadelphia Phillies with a 3.32 ERA in 4 starts. So it's been pretty quality from those two guys. Then there's Martin Perez, who's kind of an interesting story and could end up, by the time the season's over, being a bit of a forgotten man. And especially if you talk about the potential return of Spencer Strider here in the not-too-distant future, it might squeeze Perez completely out of the Braves' rotational plans. And if all goes according to plan, obviously, you want Spencer Strider locked into one of those spots for the remainder of this year and, I'd say, the remainder of the decade. But that's getting ahead of ourselves here. Perez, though, was DFA'd after his most recent start and kind of hung out there in purgatory, if you will, for a day or two. And it gave the Braves time to re-sign him to a minor league deal, and he returned to face the Philadelphia Phillies on Friday and toss 6 scoreless innings against them. And I think not only do you need Perez to bridge to the return of Spencer Strider, which we'll get to more in a moment, but teams, I don't think, were too enamored with claiming him off of waivers because he carries a $3.5 million salary. And I know that's not a whole lot, but if you can get him through waivers, then he can sign a minor league deal with you if he decides to do that. Then the Braves are responsible for that $3.5 million. And I found this just kind of an interesting thought exercise. So maybe it's almost like a deterrent. It's not a ton of money. And I think if the Braves can get the kind of starts they've gotten out of Martin Perez thus far this year, for the most part, you'll take that for just $3.5 million. But other teams may not be looking to take that on at this juncture of the season, at this moment, even if they're dealing with a couple of injuries here and there, because the fact remains that Perez is kind of a journeyman lefty at this point. He's not overpowering. There's not a whole lot of things that he does that, wow you, but he does know how to pitch. And he showed that against the Phillies a couple of nights ago. So I don't know if the Braves necessarily set out to build this barrier around teams claiming Perez or not. Either way, the fact that he signed the minor league deal came back to the Braves. It worked out for Atlanta. Let's talk about Spencer Strider for a moment, then we'll switch over to the offense. But Strider began his rehab assignment with High A Rome on Thursday, and he was throwing to Sean Murphy, who's been down there for a few days now, and was doing the catching for Spencer Strider, who went 3 1/3 innings. He allowed a hit. It was an infield hit right off the end of the bat up the third base line. Nothing special, nothing hit hard. No runs, couple of walks, and 3 strikeouts. He was clocked 95 to 97 with the fastball. Those were the reports, and he threw 50 pitches exactly. That's step number 1 of his rehab assignment. Let's hear a little bit from Walt Weiss on Spencer Strider and where exactly he is in his rehab process, because obviously this is just step number 1, but you have to be feeling pretty good about the opportunity to get a pitcher like Strider back in your rotation soon.
Getting out there, it's like spring training again for him. Just using his pitches, feeling good about his pitches. I think he feels really good just with the bullpens and the live BP about his fastball and the slider right now, and the curveball and changeup are coming. So it's just going to take time to put it all together. But, yeah, the main thing is getting through the outing, being able to rebound from the outing and feeling good. And, so it's a process, and it'll take a little bit of time. But he's on the right track. Everything's gone well with him so far.
And as I mentioned, everything went well on Thursday. So Strider's next rehab start will be for AAA Gwinnett. So he'll go from Rome to Gwinnett, since the Braves have these nice local affiliates right within the general region here. You got Augusta at low A, and then you've got Rome for high A. Columbus, Georgia now is the double A affiliate, where it used to be Mississippi. And, of course, Gwinnett is up in the Atlanta suburbs. So pretty handy to be able to keep him close at hand here. But both Sean Murphy and Spencer Strider will be moving their rehab to AAA Gwinnett on Tuesday, where Strider will make rehab start number 2. Now, I would think that we're probably looking at least 2, but maybe 3 more rehab outings. So the next one, you go from 50 pitches to 65. And then the third one, I think you get from 65 to 80. And then you'd aim to be over the 90 pitch count in the final one. That would make 4 total rehab starts. Now, they can decide where that final start should be, and maybe it could be with Atlanta. But let's say he throws again on Tuesday, April 21st, as he's scheduled. Then that would put him on April 26th for the next one, and then Friday, May the 1st for that third one. So The only thing that I could see as a reason to have him maybe throw one more minor league start is if you don't want to bring him back in Colorado. And I'm not saying that because the Rockies are stiff competition, but Coors Field is a weird place to pitch, and even with the humidor, the higher altitude, it can just do some weird things. So I don't know if you necessarily want to do that, but now let's continue the thought exercise to what comes after that. If you bring him back the second week of May, and he makes just the 4 minor league rehab starts, welcome back, Spencer Strider. You're in Dodger Stadium facing the Los Angeles Dodgers for your first start back this year. Now, obviously, Spencer's a competitor. He'll be into that, and he'll be looking forward to it. But maybe there is some kind of case to be made for perhaps bringing him back up to the big league level, letting him knock off some of the rust against the Rockies, even at Coors Field, and then have start number 2 be against the Los Angeles Dodgers. But we'll see how exactly the Braves want all of this to, I guess, play out over the course of the next 2 to 3 weeks with Spencer Strider. The good news is, though, that you've got the opportunity to get a guy that should be able to make an impact on this rotation back. And I think you just start to feel a little bit more confident as some of these pieces get back into place. Now, as far as rehab assignments are concerned, as I mentioned, Sean Murphy is also on the comeback trail with the Braves right now. He was down in High A Rome doing some catching, some DHing, and I think he's going to get to the point here pretty soon, and I would say next week, where he's going to be catching in consecutive games. And I would think that if you could get him about 25 or so plate appearances total, and I think he's only gotten maybe about 8 at this point. So a couple of weeks worth of games, maybe a little bit more. You've got 20 days total for a rehab assignment for a position player. And then you can bring him back and put him back into your, I guess, catcher and DH rotation. But it's going to be really fascinating to see how exactly the Braves deploy Sean Murphy, because he was acquired in large part because of what he can do for a pitching staff and what he does defensively speaking. And Drake Baldwin wasn't even on the radar when Sean Murphy was brought in. But Drake Baldwin has changed the entire paradigm of how you look at catching in Atlanta in the best possible way. I think he's been more than adequate defensively and handling the pitching staff. He's gotten rave reviews from any and everybody I've talked about. In fact, one of the funnier, testimonials, if you will, came from Chris Sale, who was asked, how much have you seen Drake Baldwin improve this year over last year when it comes to his game calling and defensive side of things? And Chris Sale was kind of taken aback by that comment. He was like, whoa. I mean, this guy had all this stuff together last year. There is no, hey, he was down here a year ago, and now all of a sudden this year he's that much better. But I will say, because I'm someone who's asked these types of questions before, I think more so you're just saying, as he gets more and more and more experience, just how much more is Drake Baldwin capable of? How much is he showing you? Just, it's a little bit more of a validation than maybe it sounded at the time. Because there's no question that Drake Baldwin had to learn on the job. He was thrown right out of the frying pan into the fire last year when Sean Murphy was unavailable to start the season. When I talked to Drake Baldwin at the start of spring training last year, it was like, hey, nice to meet you. Look forward to talking to you in Gwinnett. And you'll be back there kind of at that finishing school, ready if the Braves decide to call on you at some point this year. And some point that year came very quickly as soon as Sean Murphy got hurt in spring training. And Drake Baldwin has passed every single test with flying colors. He's one of the Major League RBI leaders this year. He's following up a Rookie of the Year campaign by, I think, being perhaps the Braves' best or at least most consistent hitter thus far this year. And that's not trying to take anything away from some of the other names in the lineup. It's just telling you, this Drake Baldwin kid, he's the real deal. But I think we all knew that. But how exactly did they mix in Sean Murphy? I think maybe you want to get him behind the plate a bit more, take that burden off of Drake Baldwin as much as you can, and then you can use Drake Baldwin in your DH spot and keep that bat in the lineup, because you're going to want as many plate appearances from Drake Baldwin as you can possibly get. I'm here to tell you that. But my question then becomes, and maybe this is a weird question I didn't think I'd be asking 3 weeks into March, is what do you do with Dom Smith? Dom Smith has been a great story. Dom Smith has been a great hitter. How long will that story go? I don't know. I mean, you look at the circumstances of players that you brought in, and sometimes they're just meant to be there to step in, to fill in for a certain amount of time until you get your regular guys back. But there's kind of this thing that we all do it, it's called comparison, where you just kind of wonder, well, if we just left it alone, would this guy have continued doing what he's doing? Do we really want to upset the apple cart, I guess, maybe a better way to put it? Well, ultimately you have to, because I think you want to improve your catching situation. And DHing Drake Baldwin is a good thing. if Sean Murphy can offensively be the kind of player that he was at times, at least in 2023 and part of 24, and he showed some good power last year, but that was about all he showed. You know, it's been a rough couple of years for Sean Murphy offensively. There's no sugarcoating that. The hip surgery, though, I think is a major, major opportunity for him to reset. And he plays a demanding position, so, you know, you're going to need to split that up. So we'll see exactly how much Sean Murphy's catching and Drake Baldwin is in that DH spot. But that is what I would anticipate to be the case there. And then you got Ha-Seong Kim, who is beginning to actually participate in live BPs and facing live pitching. Was that next step that Walt Weiss mentioned that Kim needed before he'll go out on a rehab assignment, which could be happening in the next week or so. That's encouraging. And the question becomes, what do you do with Mauricio Dubon? And I think that answer is even more fascinating because he can play everywhere. You could give some guys some days off. You could rotate some guys to the DH spot when Drake Baldwin just needs a rest, and at some point he will have a day off. And then you have Sean Murphy back in. All of a sudden, this team, I guess my point is, gets deeper and more talented as you bring some of these guys back in, because some of the fill-in type players that you just needed to hit on a few have done more than you could have possibly asked for in the case of especially Dom Smith. I mean, he's been terrific, but I am curious how exactly this whole thing plays out. So we'll discuss that as it goes along, and we find out a little bit more, because you can make some great plans on paper, but baseball has some different plans sometimes than you've set out for. So does life, by the way. All right, we're going to switch gears. We're going to talk about the Braves' new television network, Braves Vision. It launched this year. Brandon Gaudin is the voice of the Braves on Braves Vision. I got to catch up with him on Saturday to get some of his thoughts about what exactly this maiden voyage has been like and what he anticipates from this brand new chapter of Braves broadcasting excellence, because we all know it's got a pretty rich tradition from the TBS days. We'll talk to Brandon Gaudin next on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game and the Odyssey app.
Back to Grant McAuley for more From the Diamond.
Brought to you by Mark Spain Real Estate. Get a guaranteed offer on your home today. And Window Nation. Call the pros at Window Nation at 866-90Nation. Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Welcome back into From the Diamond with Grant McAuley right here on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game, live from the Kia Studios on a Sunday as we continue talking about a great start for the Atlanta Braves here in the 2026 season. There's also a new chapter for the Atlanta Braves this year, and it's all in how you watch the games. Just before spring training, the Braves announced the creation of Braves Vision, which is now the streaming service which brings you the vast majority of the Braves games on television. It's a new look with some of the same voices, and one of those voices was nice enough to join me to talk a little bit about the launch of Braves Vision. Thrilled to be joined by the voice of the Atlanta Braves for Braves Vision. He, of course, is Brandon Gaudin. You can hear him on a nightly basis aside C.J. Nitkowski and a host of others who make this whole thing possible. Brandon, really appreciate the time and excited to talk to you about this Braves Vision, the concept, and really the opportunity that's out in front of all of you to create something I think that's really unique and really special for the Braves.
I think that's a good way to put it. I mean, Grant, obviously you and I, we are TBS kids, and the younger generation didn't experience that, but anybody our age or older knows how special that was. Now, we can get into it. This is obviously much different. This isn't TBS. But the fact that it is owned and operated by the Braves does give that old-fashioned feel. And being able to do this for the network like this, for the team that I grew up rooting for in those TBS days, is an absolute thrill.
No doubt. That's a special aspect of it, and your background and the background of so many who are connected with this is something that I think does lend kind of a special air to it as well. But let me ask you kind of a 30,000-foot view of a broadcast perspective when it comes to baseball, because for many fans, connecting through TV and through radio is kind of the way they get to know their team, the way they follow their team. But there are different dynamics to how this whole thing comes together. The radio network, for I think a very long time, obviously, and from my experience, seems to be connected at the hip with what the team is doing. But the TV side, over the years, you search for these TV partners, and yes, you can shape and mold a broadcast in a lot of different ways. But with this Braves Vision, new opportunity, new era, new chapter, whatever you want to call it, in what could be a very long book for the Braves, I think that this really kind of gives television for Atlanta and for yourselves a whole new opportunity to kind of paint with a blank canvas, even if you know the picture that you want to present every single night.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's just start with the biggest difference, and that could be financially for the entire organization. And that really, and I'm not just saying this, that really financially has nothing to do with those of us calling the game. That element for us is pretty identical. But the chance for the Braves, because they are such a large team with a big fan base, you now own and operate everything rather than splitting some of the money that's coming in through ad sales and revenue. You get to bring it all in. Now, there's more legwork, obviously, right? You have to hire people to do all of that stuff. Mm-hmm. But you can pull more in and scrape more off the table on the back end. So I think financially, long-term, this could be a huge success for the organization. That obviously was a big incentive as to why they did this. Now, for us calling the game, the nuts and bolts of day-to-day and how we do it, I would say what's different is that there's a few more Braves promos, right, and Braves-specific items that you're going to be hearing about because the Braves want to push those things and help sell what's in Truist Park, et cetera. But I haven't felt any difference for CJ and Wiley and I. I don't think that the people at home have felt that. I think the cameras are better. The truck is a little bit better. So there are some things technically that are a little more sound and a little more, say, forward thinking. But everything from my job, from my chair, and how I've called the games has felt really, really similar. It's just nice to know that you are working with and for the same people that are also rooting on the Braves. And there's an element to that, to knowing who your bosses are, that you're not divided between a different network and the Braves. It's all under the same roof and same umbrella. And I think for us, I'll speak for CJ and Wiley for a second, it wasn't a bad setup by any stretch of the imagination. We were very used to the previous setup, but this is much more comforting. There's a lot more assurance and reassurance with it. And I think all in all, it's just a really good feel for us.
From a stylistic standpoint, when you are the voice of a team, you're beamed into that living room for these fans night after night, day after day. What is kind of the basis of how you're looking to tell that story and set that scene? Because I know for a lot of people, they can look on it in a variety of different ways about, well, are they too favorable to the home team? Is it, non-biased as it needs to be? But I feel like for a home broadcast especially, there's a warmth that comes with telling the story to the fans and knowing that you're kind of alongside one another as you deliver that play-by-play, that story of that game on that given day.
I think you're right. I think it's a fine line. I think it is silly to think that home broadcasters should not be biased towards their teams. I think the difference comes in how you define bias. If you are sitting there clearly ignoring something that is happening, let's say that Ronald Acuna, who is struggling, is 0 for his last 30, and we're sitting there pumping him up every single at bat and not mentioning that he's 0 for his last 30, I think that's where you get into the murky waters of, hey, this is a little too fanboyish, right? Because you're not going to fool the fan base. The fan base knows what's going on, so they want the context. So the difference, though, is rather than not calling it out, go ahead and call it out, but don't just then bombard the conversation with negativity. That's where I think, by and large, the viewer still wants positive voices in the booth, but you can't just totally sugarcoat and overlook everything that's not going right. So, and that was hard last year, right? Because the team was struggling. And so I thought it was our job at times to just say the reality. The Braves were out of contention, looking towards the future. You're not going to fool the fans by lying about that. But the sentiment from some, I think that, they shouldn't get more excited for the Braves. Well, I just don't think that's true. I think when your audience is 95% Braves fans, or if you're watching the Padres fans, whatever the case may be, you want to hear your announcers get more excited for your team. So naturally, when, Riley hits those homers, I'm going to get more excited in the game at Philadelphia, even though the crowd is silent for a Riley homer, than anything the Phillies do positive. So I think the question becomes, where is that fine line? And look, I'm still learning in this role, Grant, because it is different from when you're a neutral broadcaster, but it's a line that I want to continue to try to find and toe it the right way and do justice to the Braves, but also realize that when I grew up watching Skip and the guys on TBS, I also liked when they would educate me on the other team.
Mm-hmm.
I like to hear stories about the guy that was an undrafted free agent that had to toil for 12 years in the minors. So I want to share those stories too to make it a well-rounded broadcast. But certainly CJ and Wiley and I, we want the Braves to win every night. We want them to go 162-0, and that's just going to be the fact of the matter.
Yeah, winning cures a lot of things on the field, in the stands, and I think even for the team that you cover. And the words that kind of jump out to me, you talk about the balancing act that it is. I think it's just accountability, right? You want that story that you're listening to represent all of the given circumstances that surround the games, the players, the lineups, and everything else that's been going on inside a season. And clearly, it can be easier some years than others. As you brought up 2025, something that Braves and Braves fans had not seen in quite a while, which was a losing season, a lost year, if you will. So to not talk about that would have been a disservice overall, but you certainly wanted to see this team get back to doing the things it's been more known for over the years. And one of the things, it's a hallmark of the Braves franchise, of course, is winning. I'm chatting with Brandon Gaudin, the voice of the Braves for Braves Vision, talking a little bit about this new chapter in Braves television. We've kind of gotten to, I guess, discuss some of the setup for this, some of how things have gone thus far for you, and a little bit about how the story is told. But you mentioned the guys that you get to tell the story with on a regular basis, C.J. Nitkowski and Wiley Ballard, a couple of guys who I think have only enhanced the Braves broadcast since joining the ranks. How much fun is it to work with those guys? I know that there's a cast of others behind the scenes that work incredibly hard also to deliver a Braves Vision broadcast, but from the on-air perspective, how much fun is it to be able to call a game alongside those guys? Because it seems like from the outside looking in, and maybe I've seen it a little bit closer in some areas than the average fan does, you guys are having an awful lot of fun on a given day.
Yeah, and it is a thrill. It's a thrill because I know, first and foremost, how much those guys care about our product and about the Braves just in general. And so when you've got people that you feel like are as rabid of a fan as you are and who care about the broadcast element of it as much, it makes the job that much easier. And it also makes the off-air relationship that much easier because, look, we spend, and Grant, you know this because you're at the ballpark pretty much every game, we spend a lot of time together. I mean, just a lot of time grabbing dinners, grabbing lunch down at the batting cages. And so I don't know what it would be like if we didn't all get along, but I don't want to find out because I'm grateful that really everybody on and off air on our team is fortunate to have a very close-knit relationship, and we hope that comes through during the broadcast. But those guys, CJ and Wiley, and I'm not just saying this because we're talking about them. I've worked over the last 20 years in this business with a ton of different partners in all the various sports. Those guys care as much about the product as anybody I've worked with, bar none. And, you know, anybody that listens to CJ talk during the game knows how prepped he is, knows how knowledgeable he is. And Wiley, for a guy like me who didn't play baseball, knows baseball as well as anybody. And the stuff that he's able to add, yeah, people always point to the humor of Wiley, and that's great. That's what sets him apart. But Wiley knows baseball. And Wiley grew up going to Braves games as a fan living in the city, and he also was working in that TV truck as a production person before getting into the on-air side of it. So it's just such a, together with those two, it makes it so seamless when you're working with guys like that. And Gretchen Caney, the producer, and Brent Kristen, our new director, and everybody that works together behind the scenes, we genuinely just have a good relationship and have fun together. And so when you're going into the trenches every night for 162, I think when you're in game 80, 90, 100, and you're thinking, gosh, we're kind of sick of each other, it's that bond, and you go back to the kind of why are you doing this, that bond that we all have and that love and passion for it really hopefully shines through.
No, I believe that it does. And the daily grind of a baseball season, I mean, you truly experience it on an everyday basis. As I always talk about when folks ask me about going to the ballpark or covering baseball versus all the other sports, I mean, one of the things I love about it is there's another game tomorrow every day until there's not. You really get to enjoy a baseball season on an everyday basis for a better part of half the year. And if you do pretty well in the first 6 months, maybe get another month worth of baseball to go with it. So let's talk a little bit about the product before we part ways here. It is a much better start to the Atlanta Braves season here in 2026. I think we're light years away from where we were in 2025, but you've been watching this club for about 3 weeks. It just feels like, you know, the vibe of the team is good, but they're just back to being, I think, a little bit closer to who you actually expected them to be. And that has to be a relief not only for the fans who are watching on an everyday basis, but for the players who have been working so hard to get through a season like last year, put it behind them, and truly, as the saying goes, get back to business.
Yet I would even say go back to 2024, right, Grant? And you and I remember us doing an interview in the middle of that season, because after 2023, which was historically good, and then the struggle in the postseason was frustrating, but everybody expected that 2024 would look a lot like 23. The Braves got in the postseason, but I think we would all agree that that year they underperformed. And everybody was wondering, wait, where's the offense? What happened? How did we go from the top to the kind of the bottom third there? So 24 and 25, I kind of lumped together, and I just thought there's no way that that's going to continue. But I'll be honest, when you went into spring training, in the middle of spring training, you realized the pitching deficiencies injury-wise. I was worried, and I was one of the ones wondering, I'm kind of surprised they haven't added at least one starter, maybe two. And then you had the Profar thing. And so to look at all of that and now think where the Braves are, I think two things. One, the offense not being as good the last couple of years was an outlier. I'm not saying that 23 levels are normal, because they're not, but I think this is a really, really good offense that is now humming again, and they're having fun, and that's obviously been so good to see. What I've been so darn impressed with is the pitching, and to the fact that they've kind of cobbled this rotation together. And the bullpen, I think getting Suarez was so huge. I think getting Kenley back was big. I think now the thing is, okay, the groundwork is set here. The team is already one of the best in baseball, and now they can get even better. That to me is really exciting to think about as we get closer to the All-Star break.
Definitely a very exciting start for the season, but as we know, it is a long year, and as we also know, we'll be seeing each other around the ballpark quite a bit, so we'll get to talk about it all the while. Brandon, I really appreciate you taking a little bit of time on what is an off-day Saturday for you to talk about the 2026 Braves and, of course, the launch of Braves Vision as well, and I look forward to seeing you back at Truist Park very soon.
Absolutely, Grant. Thanks for having me, man.
All right, when we come back, we will dive into some more of the stats and trends that has Atlanta with one of the best records in all of baseball over the first 3 weeks. It comes your way next on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley right here on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game and the Odyssey app.
Baseball, talking Braves and beyond. Baseball with From the Diamond, Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Welcome back into From the Diamond with Grant McAuley right here on 92.9 The Game. We're live from the Kia Studios on a Sunday as we close out the weekend. Braves going to close out their business with the Philadelphia Phillies, and then they'll see Philadelphia again a week from now at Truist Park. So these two teams will get very familiar with one another. But I do want to talk about some of the offensive exploits for the Braves, and I think some expectations, obviously, on certain players to be able to be right front and center in the middle of all the good things that are going on. And one of the gentlemen that those expectations have to feel a little bit heavier after the last couple of years, and injury and inconsistency and things that have kind of taken away from some of the shine that I think that we expect to see, and that's Austin Riley. I mean, this is a guy that, when you talk about expectations, when you get the biggest contract in franchise history, it's just written right in there, both literally and figuratively, that you need to be, I think, a major contributor to just about every good thing that goes on in the Braves offense. And clearly the Braves believed that Austin Riley's capable of doing that, because if you look at what he did between 2021 and 2023, we're talking about a 35-plus homer, 100 RBI bat, hitting upper 280s, and giving you about 5 to 6 wins above replacement at third base. And that makes you one of the best third basemen in Major League Baseball, and that would be the reasons why you'd want to keep this guy around for another decade or so. And with Austin Riley, I think that not being able to find the consistency that he wants during the season is for starters. And then injury over the past couple of years. In 2024, he gets hit in the hand and has to spend a whole bunch of time with his hand in a cast over the course of the winter, and really, I think, kind of set him back getting into 2025. And then in 2025, it was the abdominal issue that he dealt with during the season that ultimately cost him the final 6 weeks of the season. So he's been dealt a bad hand, and those are things that are out of his control, obviously, but Austin Riley has continued to try to work and to refine and to get his swing back to where it needs to be, and it quite simply wasn't there last year. Long story short, as you looked at this year, a very good spring training for him, and I don't say that, just in the way the spring training numbers should matter in a huge way, because they don't. But I do think that the way that his numbers had trended, not just the batting average department, not just the power department, but also the walks and the strikeout total. I mean, everything just looked good that you saw from Austin Riley. And then the first couple of weeks were a little bit of a struggle. But the adjustments, sometimes they take time to get them incorporated into the game. So I had a chance to catch up with Austin Riley after Wednesday's game, which saw him hit not only his first home run of the year, as the Braves took 2 out of 3 from the Marlins in that series, but also a ringing double off the right center field wall. So those couple of hits and those type of hits, I think Austin Riley had been looking for quite some time. So here's some of the discussion we had with reporters talking to Austin Riley after that game to get a little bit of insight on where exactly the Braves' third baseman was feeling like his swing is.
I feel like I'm in a better spot when I land to be able to pull the trigger. And it's, early on I think I was over-aggressive and then trying to tone it down a little bit. It got a little soggy with the front side and trying to find that happy medium. So last couple of days have been better. Try to build off of it.
So the opposite field double, much better than the home run?
Yeah. I mean, like I said, just staying on a pitch. It's I think the last year and a half, the way the swing pass has been, it's like trying to pulling a lot more balls and obviously when I'm at my best, I'm driving to the big part of the field. So being able to stay on a slider and hit it with some authority was nice.
You talked about those adjustments you've made and how long this process has kind of been. How difficult is it to do all that work and then get out into the game and try to incorporate those changes when you're facing big league guys? And
no doubt. I mean, it's tough because a lot of the stuff that kind of working on is just stride length and where I'm at when I land, and then you get in the game and 40,000 fans and adrenaline's rushing and trying to just slow the game down. And yeah, so I mean it's been tough. Like I said, it's just a step in the right direction. Obviously, a long season. Just try to build off of it.
And that's what you try to do over the course of a 162 is to find that momentum and then just be able to replicate that. And sometimes those results are just not there for you the way that they have been over the past 3 to 4 games for Austin Riley, because he followed up that performance against the Marlins on Wednesday, the homer, the double, then 2 more homers against the Phillies on Friday night, and then a multi-hit game on Saturday as well. So things are starting to turn in the right direction for Austin Riley, who all of a sudden is batting .350, who all of a sudden has 3 home runs among his 20 hits, who has scored 12 runs, knocked in 14 more, and we're 21 games into the season. Now you start to extrapolate those stats out over the course of 162, and you start to feel like, hey, maybe Austin Riley is on his way. But it did take, 17, 18 games to finally get that first home run, and I don't think anybody was feeling it more so than Austin Riley was. And I wrote about this for Battery Power this week, just about the importance of Austin Riley getting himself back on track and how long he has been working on it. And the injuries, of course, are part of the story, but just overall how important he is to the Braves lineup. I mean, the spring training I was talking about, he batted .357 with 5 homers and knocked in 13 runs and slugged nearly .800 over the course of spring training in 17 games. So when you look at those, again, I understand he's not going to be facing the top pitchers in top form of the midseason that we may be seeing, or even once the bell rings and the lights are bright and the stadiums are bigger. But still, those are the kind of results that you'd much rather have than struggling your way through spring training. And I think you needed to see those kinds of numbers. But more so and more important than anything he can do in the state of Florida in the month of March are the kinds of things that he's been able to do over the past week. And even, I would say, on, Friday night, he hit a couple of home runs. He struck out a couple of times. But the strikeouts, just looking at them, looked like pitches that you could have challenged with ABS. And I know that that's easy to say on the outside looking in, and obviously the team kind of has to manage its challenges. But I would say with Austin Riley, and actually that might have been Saturday's game, come to think of it. But either way, it's just part of the game that you kind of are learning as you go. I've been talking to some of the Braves, talking to Walt Weiss a little bit about this over the, first 3 weeks now. And it is a learning process when it comes to ABS. But getting Austin Riley going was a part of the Braves lineup that very, very much needed to start to feel like it was kind of getting back to normal, because Matt Olson is off to a very nice start for himself. We've talked about Drake Baldwin a lot because Drake has just hit the ground running this year and made it a continuation of everything that you saw that won in the Rookie of the Year award. But how about Matt Olson? 21 games thus far. He just passed 800 consecutive games played, so he's baseball's Iron Man right now. I believe that's 11th longest streak of consecutive games in baseball history. leading the league with 10 doubles. He's got 5 homers, knocked in 15 runs, and scored 17 more in 21 games. So Matt Olson is trending toward a very, very nice season. You get him and Riley going in the middle, and Ronald Acuna Jr. going at the top, and all of a sudden this Braves lineup is going to look a lot more like you expect it to. Before we kind of turn the page and talk about a couple of the other guys that are really starting to turn it on here, I got a chance to ask Walt Weiss a little bit about what he's seeing from Austin Riley right now that has him feeling good about where his third baseman is at the plate.
With Austin, and you can say this for probably several of the guys, they're on time. Austin looks on time to me. And I think the other night he hit an upper 90s fastball and hooked it in the corner for a double. That's a really good sign. That just means that he's more on time. He's not late. Because when you're late, you gotta rush and make bad decisions. He just looks like more on time to me.
Yeah, and on time means his swing is where it needs to be, when it needs to be, and then you're able to inflict maximum damage, and that really is the hallmark of Austin Riley, because one thing I went digging into is what has changed about Austin's swing. The launch angle, the point of attack, that may have changed. That may be the thing he's constantly working on, but this is a hitter that has elite bat speed, and if you've still got that, you've got a chance to do maximum damage and make some serious hard contact, and we're seeing that from Austin Riley. And speaking of hard contact, nobody in the Braves lineup does it better and more consistently than Ronald Acuna Jr. year after year, but he was also off to a bit of a slow start, and this was the stat that really baffled me. The first 11 games of the season, Acuna wasn't hitting his way on. He was drawing his walks, but Ronald scored 1 run in those first 11 games. And he had hits in just 5 of those 11 games as well. But since then, he has now hit safely in 9 out of 10. He has scored 7 runs in the last 10 games as well, and 13 hits, 6 of those for extra bases and 5 walks. So Ronald Acuna Jr. is starting to look a lot more like Ronald Acuna Jr., and you need him to at the top of the order. And I would say that Ronald, when you start to look at some of the advanced stuff, has been one of the more unlucky hitters in Major League Baseball. So if that luck turns for Ronald, now you're talking about Ronald Acuna Jr., Drake Baldwin, Matt Olson, Austin Riley, 1 through 4. And I challenge you to find another National League team this side of the Los Angeles Dodgers that offers that kind of firepower in the top of its order. And then you can start to see some of the other players who could really make an impact having a good year as well. One of those, Ozzie Albies, who is swinging the bat well from both sides of the plate. Really encouraging start to a season in which I feel like I don't want to point out that it's make or break for Ozzie, but if somebody really needed to, and Austin Riley is obviously a great candidate for it, but if someone really needed to reestablish himself in a big way, I would put Ozzie on that list as well. Last year was one of the more disappointing seasons, or the most disappointing season, I would say, statistically, of his career. He's had some injury disappointments. He's missed some playing time before, but at the end of the year last year, 157 games played, Ozzie Albies hit .240 with 16 home runs and a on-base percentage barely over 300 and slugged under 400 for the first time in his career in a full Major League season, and that just was very un-Ozzie Albies-like. Final couple of months, I felt like he was starting to look a little bit more like himself, and then, of course, he breaks a bone in his hand and has to miss a little bit of time, but he came back to spring training in great shape. He came into the season, I think, highly motivated to get back to being the Ozzie Albies we expect to see. There have been some big home runs, some key hits. He's drawing some walks. And one thing I've really noticed from Ozzie, and this speaks to kind of what the Braves have done on the whole as well or better than any time I can think of in recent memory, is defensively speaking, Ozzie Albies has taken a huge step forward. He just seems to be, his range has improved. The arm is what the arm is. It's not going to be, one of the better infield arms in Major League Baseball, but when you put yourself in position to make the plays the way that he has thus far this year, I think that's incredibly encouraging because you got a Gold Glove first baseman. You've got a Gold Glove shortstop right now. Mauricio Dubon has 2 of those things. And they were one as utility players, but he can play everywhere and he can play at a high level. And I think he's done that thus far at shortstop this year. And I think Austin Riley's defense has been particularly good. So when you start to add all that stuff up, it gives you the kind of defense that you need that can support the pitching staff that has put up the kind of numbers that it has. Because it's not just the Braves pitchers making pitches. It is the Braves from a defensive side of things making the plays that they need to be making. And that's how you end up with the best ERA in baseball, which is where the Braves are sitting. And they're doing that, yes, with Chris Sale, but Bryce Elder making a huge contribution there. Reynaldo Lopez and Grant Holmes and Martin Perez. This is your starting 5 right now. It could look a little bit different with Spencer Strider here in the next couple of weeks. It could look even more different if you get Spencer Schwellenbach or Hurston Waldrop back in at some point in June or July. So the start to the season, I think, is incredibly encouraging on a number of different fronts because guys that you needed to step into spots because you were missing key players and you needed them to make some kind of contribution, they're not just contributing, they're helping to drive your team. Some of the pitching performances we're seeing and some of the hitting performances with the likes of Dom Smith, the likes of Mauricio Dubon as well, big things happening from sources you don't necessarily expect it to come from. But the Braves offense, as I mentioned, have scored the most runs in Major League Baseball coming into the day. They have the best ERA in baseball coming into the day. So, as I've said before, if you score the most runs and allow the fewest, you're going to do a lot of winning. And that's what the Braves have done. As for what's ahead for the Braves over this coming week, they'll finish things up on Sunday in Philadelphia, then a 4-game series with the Nationals, 6:45 on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, a 1:05 getaway day on Thursday. Then they'll welcome the Philadelphia Phillies to town on Friday for a 3-game series at Truist Park, and the Detroit Tigers will follow them in. Braves have put together their probable pitchers for that National series. We'll see Bryce Elder against Jake Irvin. Elder will be on regular rest. He's going to go a day sooner, though, because Reynaldo Lopez is going to start Game 2 against Foster Griffin, and that will give Lopez a couple of extra days, which I think could be a good thing for him throughout the course of the season. Braves always trying to do that. Martin Perez will face Zach Littell, and I think this is kind of a start-to-start thing here for Perez and the Braves, especially with Spencer Strider working his way back, slated to make rehab start number 2 on Tuesday. And then we'll see Chris Sale Thursday against Cade Cavalli, and as we talked about with Sale, some strikeout history for him. 8th most Ks by a lefty in Major League Baseball history. He could pass Chuck Finley both there and on the all-time list. Chris Sale could be up to 28th as we watch his Hall of Fame career continue. So that's going to do it for this edition of From the Diamond. As always, I appreciate Brandon Gaudin for making some time for me, joining the show to talk to Braves Vision a little bit earlier, and appreciate you for making From the Diamond part of your weekend and part of your baseball podcast regimen. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be back next Sunday for 2 more hours of great Braves and baseball talk. Until then, this has been From the Diamond. I'm Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. So long, everyone.